on in. And happy 5-year anniversary of the August complex fires, wildfires, 2020. We were just talking with Tim Hyland, Santa Cruz Unit of State Parks, and Susie Petrie, Peninsula Open Space Trust. This is kind of an auspicious time of year. I think the August fires, the CDU unit started on the 16th of August, and Tim was sharing that the 19th 5-year anniversary of today was when they finally were able to go in and try to dodge unstable trees. So we think this is a great time to kind of look back. It's 5 years. That's plenty of time for the environment to respond. Come on now. Plenty of time for us to individually take stock in how the environment, how vegetation has responded 5 years hence, not just to the wildfires, but also to our management. So we're really excited about this topic today, and I thank you all for being here. I'm Tom Robinson. It's my pleasure to run these meetings with my colleague, Michaela Nee from Together Bay Area. And like I said, today we're focusing on post-wildfire vegetation and landscape responses. We know that vegetation responds in all kinds of ways after fire, and our collective approaches to monitoring, treatment, permitting, and all decision-making are just as varied as those responses. So this is kind of a chance to learn from each other about what's working, what's challenging, and what's emerging in terms of our observations. As I said, it's the 5-year anniversary of the August lightning complex fires, and we're all kind of still seeing and learning what those responses are, whether it's in forests or chaparral or grasslands or riparian areas. And then also, what are the changes we're seeing in our individual organizations? How are we sort of marshaling our efforts and our personnel differently since then? We're going to hear from 4 folks who raised their hands. They heeded the call to tell their stories about what they're seeing. But before we jump into hearing from those folks, just wanted to open the floor for any quick announcements. This is a working group. This is kind of our networky part. Would love to hear from you all. Any upcoming prescribed burns that you want to let the network know about. Any field days or workshops, learning opportunities. Any monitoring or research opportunities that you'd like folks to know about. And really anything else that you think that that folks on this call would benefit from hearing or knowing. Please feel free to put that in chat. And then also, we can make a couple of minutes if anybody wants to make an announcement using your voice and not just your fingers in the chat. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand. While you're simmering on that, I'm just gonna say thanks again for joining and for being a part of this working group. It's been a real joy to be a part of it, and it really emerged from those from the August lightning complex fires. We were sort of born from this working group was kind of born from that incident. Carol, you've got your hand raised. Thanks so much. What do you have for us?
I just wanted to mention that the Napa Resource Conservation District came up with a new webinar and template for a smoke management plan to help those who want to do prescribed fires, and it was aimed towards their prescribed burn association. So I'll put in the chat the link for and there were 2 different YouTubes. There was 2 different sessions, and then we have a template that we're offering there too. So it's meant to help folks put more fire on the ground.
Fantastic. Yeah, and harkens back to our topic earlier this year on smoke. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Other announcements? Thanks for that, Carol. Thank you so much. Yes, indeed, Andrea. We'll get the producers working on casting immediately. Board in flames. I like it. Well, excellent. Nothing stopping you, any of you, from posting in chat during the presentations. So go for it. Also, we have our Google group, which hopefully you're all on. You can always post there for opportunities, learning, that kind of thing. So without further ado, um, we've invited some folks from this community to share their perspectives and their observations and kind of examples of their work. We're going to hear from Susie Petrie first from Peninsula Open Space Trust, who's going to talk about observations and action out at San Vicente Redwoods in straddling Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties. Do I have that right? Is it all in Santa Cruz?
So I'm just going to talk about one property in Santa Cruz County.
Okay.
The
Excellent.
post does work in across 3 counties.
There we go. Okay. Then we'll hear from Monica Delmartini from the Ag and Open Space District in Sonoma County, who's going to share her observations and the Ag and Open Space District's observations kind of throughout Sonoma County. The August wildfire, the lightning complex fires affected that county as it did so many counties in the Bay Area. Then we'll hear from Tim Hyland about the CZU fire, Big Basin State Park, Redwood State Park. And then Andrea Williams with the Williams Ecological Assessments and Planning will walk us to kind of take us home, showing us the fire followers database on iNaturalist. So really excited to learn from all these folks, and we'll open up the floor for discussion after we hear from each of them. Each speaker will sort of share for about 8 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and conversation. So please drop your questions or any resources in the chat as we go. And then let's go ahead and dive in. Susie, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. I'm going to turn on my timer to help me keep track of time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you everybody for joining today. I am Susie Petrie. I work for Peninsula Open Space Trust, as Tom mentioned, and we're going to be discussing post-fire vegetation management at San Vicente Redwoods, which is a property just north of Santa Cruz and the Santa Cruz Mountains. So POST's mission is to protect open space on the peninsula and in the South Bay for the benefit of all. And one of the properties where we do that is San Vicente Redwoods. This is a nearly 9,000 acre property co-managed by 4 different land trusts. So, and I know we have some partners on the call. So thank you guys for joining. Sempervirens Fund co-owns the property with Post, and then Save the Redwoods League has a conservation easement over the property, and they do active restoration under that easement on the property with us. And then the Land Trust Santa Cruz County manages all the public access there. So everything we do is a big collaboration. For Post, what we really are excited about at San Vicente Redwoods is demonstrating the compatibility of conservation, meaningful fire resilience, sustainable working forest, and public access. So San Vicente Redwoods, also known as SVR, was protected to preserve biodiversity and protect important watersheds and viewsheds, connect complex habitats, and provide a space for public recreation, education, and scientific study. It's also a landscape in recovery. This is a picture of San Vicente Redwoods. If you've been there, you know how different it is now. Back in the early 1900s, parts of it were totally clear cut with doing unsustainable forestry timber practices. And in a redwood forest, when you clear cut, you come back with overstocked conditions, too many trees per square acre, which creates a whole suite of problems. We also have experienced 3 fires in the fairly recent past, the 1948 Pine Mountain Fire, the 2009 Lockheed Fire, and the 2020 CZU Lightning Complex Fire, which Tom just mentioned we just hit our 5-year anniversary of. So in these overstocked conditions, experiencing fire on a semi-regular basis, we had a lot on our plate already of restoration work, forest enhancement. We're also bringing in public access to an area where it wasn't previously. In addition to that, San Vicente Redwoods provides CAL FIRE with really important opportunities to manage fires on a regional basis. This is a snapshot taken from the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, written in 2010, showing a lot of the ridgelines and roads at San Vicente Redwoods highlighted as important high priority areas for management to protect the community. And actually in that 2009 Lockheed wildfire that I mentioned, CAL FIRE did come onto the property and use one of our primary roads to stop the progression of fire by creating a black line and burning fuel before the fire got there. So we have a proven track record of providing that opportunity for CAL FIRE, and that's been really helpful in figuring out how we need to respond and funding for some of this work that we're doing on the property now. So we've been doing, before the fire, we were doing shaded fuel break work. We even were able to do a prescribed burn in Oak Woodland, a series of small ones adjacent to a road in partnership with Elmwoodson Land Trust. And primarily CAL FIRE was doing the heavy lifting there. And while we were busy doing all this work, the 2020 CZU lightning complex fire occurred. It covered over 86,000 acres, including one 40,000 acre jump overnight in one really hot, dry, windy night. It burned really hot in a lot of places, especially at San Vicente Redwoods, in the northern part of the property. It was really devastating to the community there. And I'm just going to kind of take you on a visual tour of kind of how the site has progressed since that time. This is an example of a shaded fuel break that we were working on before the fire happened. In fact, we were working on it the day the fire happened. The contractor left his equipment out there to continue working on it. Here's his burned excavator. You can see now, if we continue this work, it's not much of a shaded fuel break. A lot of these trees are dead, have no canopy left. A lot of people think that when a fire comes through, this is what it looks like. This is a snapshot in time. Things change very quickly. So this is a wildlife camera that was set up, and I have a few different pictures from the same spot. So this is pre-fire. You can see there's a canopy, it's dark, it's moist, there's a lot of leaf litter. You can see the ground. And then this is just 5 months post-fire. So you can see all that material that was on the ground burnt up. All that's left are blackened trunks of the trees above ground. You're just getting the beginnings of those live roots resprouting, forming kind of a bush around the base of some of these dead trees above ground. And that poor deer is just not knowing what to do with itself. Lost all its cover, so very exposed. This is just 2 years post-fire. You see all the fire-following species coming in, taking advantage of that canopy, of that open canopy, and rich conditions. 2.5 months after the fire, you see branches coming down, and you can imagine as those dead trees fall down, you get a big tangling mess. So this is just a video. I'm sorry if it doesn't work too well. This is a former madrone forest that used to be able to walk through open understory. Now those madrones have died, and it's just basically a sea of yerba santa to swim through. So really challenging conditions to work in now, and it presents a lot of challenges. So we had plans to push forward with trail work and timber harvest and things like that we all stopped as soon as the fire happened. We wanted to allow the ecosystem to respond a little bit. We wanted to track how things change. We wanted to give the soil a chance to get some ground cover before we're moving around in it. So we wanted to identify opportunities for enhancement and identify sensitive resources and figure out how to prevent this kind of thing from happening on this property again, and however we can. So really provide us with opportunities to not create such decadent fuel conditions. So we knew we wanted to manage fuels, but we had to figure out how, and we wanted to bring back fire because we know that's a critical part of our ecosystem in California. So we started focusing on the roads and ridge lines. That was already the plan. It just makes sense from fire behavior to be able to do that. It's also really strategic because once you have dead trees hanging over roads, those trees fall down and block the roads. You can't use them. So really clearing along roads is a critical factor to just allow you to keep on moving. And that's really costly. If you can figure out how to get more funding beyond that, it's even great to work within kind of the matrix of the shaded fuel breaks along ridgeline and roads that you've created. So basically taking out standing dead trees, that that are in between those areas. Our goal again is to get prescribed burns back on the property, and having a bunch of standing dead trees makes that really, really difficult. And we do timber harvest on the property, so we're able to do some sensitive salvage timber harvest to try to clear out some of these areas with various partners. And then we didn't want to just rearrange the fuels the dead trees we were taking out of the forest. We wanted to get them out of the property, or at least out of the areas where we wanted to be doing prescribed burns in the future. We didn't want to just be leaving these logs on the ground to burn as 1,000-hour fuels during prescribed burn. So here's a video of sort of how one of the primary ways that we've been managing our biomass. So here we have 3 air curtain burners in the green that we borrowed from Cal Fire, and a carbonator that is provided by Ventana Forestry, which is a timber contractor out of the Big Sur area. And you can see we have 2 operators using excavators to load logs that have been moved out of shaded fuel breaks to a consolidated area where we can process them in this equipment. We have water tanks, and the area has been cleared around it. So let's see how to make this advance. There we go. It's just a same picture, different view, just showing how the logs have to be split. So the logs have to be cut down from a shaded fuel break, trucked to somewhere, then and then put into these boxes. So a lot of moving material, very expensive. Luckily, we've been very fortunate getting grant funding, but it's been a learning opportunity for us all. In addition to moving those big logs, we're also managing fuels, the slash and small diameter material with burn piles or mastication. And again, this is all to put us closer towards doing larger scale prescribed burns. We're excited to be creating larger units. So we're hoping to have maybe about 60 or about 20 prescribed burn units. Some as big as like 100 acres, maybe 200 acres, where we can do prescribed burns in the future because we've removed all the standing dead material. The idea is to reduce those fuels in a way where prescribed burning can be done safely and effectively to manage fuels, so we don't have to keep having manual removal or mechanical removal of material. So I know I'm a little over time, but I did want to thank you, and just I have a series of links if you have any questions about anything that I talked about. We have some good resources out there to click on. So I think I have a minute or 2 for questions.
Yes, indeed, Susie. Questions for Susie? So exciting to think about large scale prescribed burning as a result of your these tough decisions, tough and expensive decisions.
Yeah, we're really
Move.
excited to get closer to that reality. There's still, you know, a process to make through, but we're hoping to make it happen. As private landowners, it's a little bit different than some of our, you know, agencies, partners who are able to self-insure, self-staff, things like that.
Indeed. Excellent. Let's see here. Jorge, I have a question. How do you create shaded fuel breaks with environmental variables or more more visually? Is it, sounds like, are you using kind of metrics to you're shooting for certain structural metrics, or is it more visual?
It all depends on the area. We have one road that we sort of think is our backbone that gets us from the top of the property to the bottom. And that's an area we're doing a 200-foot wide on each side shaded fuel break. So quite large. And really the idea there was to get any tree within falling height of the road because this is the area that's been used by Cal Fire for that back line. We want to be able to get them into the property and without having to, you know, worry about hazards during an emergency situation. Other areas where we're doing shaded fuel break, it's really smaller. It might be, you know, just the like 10, 15 feet off a road. Or, you know, it all depends on the other variables, how much fuel is adjacent. It's a bit of an art.
Slope. Sure.
Yeah.
Good to have Nadia, Amy probably weighing in on that stuff.
Our artist, yes.
Love it. So great. Susie, thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, go take care of that child.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Susie. All right, next, let's hear from Monica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Delmartini. I'm Stewardship Specialist and Fire Ecologist with Sonoma County Ag and Open Space. Susie did such a nice job with her presentation that was so very professional and elegant. And I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm just going to be Italian and talk with my hands a lot, and you're going to have to picture things. But I figured 5 minutes, I can just touch on a couple of things. For those of you who don't know me, I used to work with the National Park Service. I've been involved with fire ecology and prescribed fire implementation for a long time now. Some of that work in the Southern Sierra Nevada and also here in the Bay Area. I manage the Saddle Mountain Open Space Preserve, which is owned by Sonoma County Ag and Open Space. And then I also wear a number of hats professionally, where I'm working with easement landowners around providing some technical input and guidance, largely around how to design vegetation management projects on their properties that are ecologically robust and sensitive to the specifics of individual sites. And I support and help out with prescribed burning undertaken by a number of landowners and agencies here in the North Bay, to the extent that I can get out and still get my toes warm. So I just was going to use my time to talk about really just two specific observations that I have made, both at the Saddle Mountain Preserve and also at other properties and other landscapes in Sonoma County in the last several years in post-fire environments, specifically in mixed hardwood forest and oak woodland type habitats, that are just kind of like the two things that are top of mind for me, of things that have really caught my attention and that are proving to be important components about how I'm thinking as a land steward around designing and implementing projects with an eye toward past fire effects and future fire effects. And I don't want to take up too much time, but just, for those who aren't familiar with Saddle Mountain, it did burn in the glass fire in 2020, which was a little bit separate from the big lightning bust, but close to the same time. So we're still at that 5-year post-fire point. We saw pretty low severity fire effects across most of the acreage out there. It is a really diverse landscape, so we had kind of consequently diverse fire effects. So lots of places where we just had, pretty gentle understory burns, not too much canopy scorch, up to areas where we had stand replacing fire in a Sargent cypress stand. So it really depends on vegetation community, but by and large, my work there in the post-fire years has been focused on addressing hazardous fuels resulting from that fire, or resulting from a combination of a period of fire exclusion followed by a severe wildfire, with an eye toward improving the resilience of that landscape, both to future wildfires and to planned prescribed burns. So kind of that dual effect. And a lot of that work has taken place in mixed hardwood forest and oak woodland, because those are the habitats that saw, in some cases, kind of the lightest impacts from that fire. Typical of our region, a lot of those stands were really heavily invaded by relatively small Douglas fir prior to the fire. So we had biodiversity concerns, we had forest management concerns. Before the fire, we were already planning to get in and thin and reintroduce periodic burning to those stands. When the glass fire came through, what it did was effectively kill those trees without consuming them. It was just a hot enough surface fire that those trees got scorched. But we were left with functionally the same forest stand structure, only with that critical ladder fuels layer now dry and much more available for combustion. So I guess that's one point to make, is post-fire, we were looking at a landscape that in some areas would burn hotter and with greater intensity in a subsequent wildfire. So that very quickly became my top priority for management out there. So we've completed a lot of that work. We did a lot of understory thinning, targeting live dug fir up to about 10 inches in diameter, and dead standing material roughly in the same diameter class, doing a lot of piling and burning to clean that up. The before and after photos from my photo monitoring locations, which I should have put in a PowerPoint for you today, but they look really beautiful. They're like the great thing to show my grant manager, look what we did with the $300,000 that you gave us. And then now, like that was in 2022. Now I was in one of those stands with one of my CAL FIRE colleagues recently talking about prepping it for a prescribed burn that we've been trying to do for the last couple of years. And he was looking at it and saying, would you consider thinning in here? And I was like, man, we already did it. Can't you see it? It's like so dramatically different than it was. But that's really, and I know this doesn't sound like rocket science at all. It's a known phenomenon, but really just recognizing how dynamic woody surface fuel loading is in the post-fire environment as fire affected material, whether it's killed or just damaged limbs, starts to come down, even after doing, a really robust cleanup and understory thinning and 2 rounds of pile burning where we've been pulling freshly fallen material into those piles. It's still, you've got like one limb on an oak tree that got scorched and finally it comes down in a winter storm and it's just very scrappy. And it's, obviously understandable to everyone here and a known phenomenon that the longer you exclude fire and you exclude disturbance from a disturbance dependent environment, sort of the bigger the mess you're going to have, or the longer it's going to take to get that system back into an equilibrium state. And I talk with people about that all the time. I talk with landowners about understanding that you're not going to fix 150 years of fire suppression with a single grant funded project or with a single prescribed burn. You're not going to see the results that you want to see in 5 or 10 or maybe even 20 years. The places where I have seen repeated entries of thinning and burning really be effective are literally in places where there are 40 to 50 years of repeated effort over time, which can be disheartening, but you just sort of have to have faith that you're on that track. So that's just one thing that I'm noticing very acutely as a land manager is that the speed at which that woody material is building up on the forest floor in some areas. And, recognizing that downed woody debris, while a very important habitat component in any forest ecosystem, once it goes over a certain tipping point, becomes a major driver of canopy impacts in future fires. There's a tremendous amount of energy in material that might not even look that huge to you. And the impacts to canopy scorch and potentially even overstored tree mortality are considerable. So just managing with an eye toward that and realizing that investment in time and resources is going to be long-term and is going to be perhaps greater than what you might imagine at first. The other thing that I've been noticing at Saddle Mountain, but also, across different areas with similar habitats, particularly places where there's Oregon white oak or some of our kind of smaller diameter deciduous oaks, oak savanna type habitat. Again, a long period of fire exclusion has allowed a lot of litter and duff, a lot of annual grasses to build up in those areas. Perhaps grazing and, land use practices have changed within that same period of time. And a lot of those trees following both the glass fire or the fires in 2020 and also the 2017 fires have recovered as individual organisms really beautifully. They regrew their canopies quickly. They obviously sustained very little damage overall. But what you might not see if you're just casually walking through is that a lot of those trees have sustained small areas of damage right at their bases, little like palm-sized cat faces, little areas of platy or loose bark that, again, loose bark, basal cavities, these are things that can be important for wildlife. They're an important component of a diverse forest stand. But those little spots at the base of trees are incredibly receptive to fire. And I've seen even very, very low intensity follow-up broadcast burning in some of these habitats very quickly establish fire that's almost impossible to mop up in the bases of those trees, and seeing mature oak starting to come down, within an hour of ignitions in some cases. And additionally, of course, things coming down in winter storms as they are dealing with wind and wetter conditions. So that's something that I am like kind of putting into my decision-making matrix a lot, thinking about how to, ideally you have a wildfire, pass through a landscape, and one of the kind of silver linings of that can be, you've gained some momentum. How do you keep that momentum going? The fire's provided a reset. It's consumed some surface fuels. It's done something beneficial ecologically for that system. How do you then follow that up with additional stewardship, with additional intentional burning to kind of, get that resilience back, get that equilibrium state back? And just recognizing that there is a vulnerability and sensitivity in that landscape, and particularly for some of those trees, that's going to require, in some cases, fairly intensive prep. If you're trying to burn an area that's got a lot of oaks, that the majority of them have those types of little, easy to miss damages at the base. If your objective is not to knock out a number of your trees in your prescribed burn, you may be needing to do a fair amount of weed whipping, or putting scrapes around those trees, or making sure that your firing team is closely followed by your holders with a water source to really get water on those. That can be really effective, but you really have to think about it and plan it in advance. And just, kind of in closing, like these two observations, they're in relation to one another. And if I had made you visuals, I'd make you a graph that looked like that, right? With crossing lines, where the post-fire environment, you have your woody fuels increasing and increasing. You're trying to get in there to put fire back on the landscape. You want to do it before those fuels increase to the point where they're going to have, kind of overly severe effects. At the same time, you may be waiting after a wildfire for the system to kind of shake it off, for those trees to go through the process of healing their bark, of regrowing their canopy. There could be, after the glass fire, we had 2 years of drought. And so some of those trees were really struggling. So it might not be in the best interest of a stand to go in and burn it, exactly the next year or 2 years later. You might be waiting to see, like, where is that point of optimal resilience where we can put this stressor back on the landscape again. And it's like the fuel loading is going up and the trees are getting healthier and stronger, and you're looking for that sweet spot. But just recognizing that may be a brief moment in time, and that you may need to be nimble enough to think about doing some additional management and additional prep prior to putting fire back in. So that's what I got.
Oh, Monica, thank you so much. So much wisdom in there, and you painted beautiful visuals with your words and your hands. Thank you so much. My goodness. It would be fun to see that graph, but you described it really well. I'm just kind of giddy with the kind of almost what hard-won observations and wisdom you just dropped. It takes time and careful observation and thought to make those observations. I'm gonna open it up to questions. I'm gonna stop waxing. Questions for Monica.
Yeah, this is Beatrix. My counterpart Susie just presented. So we managed San Vicente Redwood. So hearing you talk about this, I think about some of what we're seeing too at San Vicente. Like the oak trees, that's another big one. We want to prepare for a prescribed fire, fingers crossed, with Cal Fire, knock on wood, this fall. But we're already talking about scraping around the trees, because I don't want to lose our oak trees, which are very special. But I wanted to go back to, you mentioned the Douglas fir. So it sounded like the Douglas fir that was encroaching your oak woodlands were killed during the fire. I'm wondering what you're starting to see. I know it sounded like, based on our learning from like the 2009 Lockheed fire, like around year 5 is when these standing dead Douglas fir trees start to come down in year 5 just naturally. I'm wondering if you're seeing that at Saddle Mountain.
Yeah, to a slight extent at Saddle Mountain. I will say I was just up on another property this morning, a little bit south in the Mayacamas, and they are starting to have some stuff tip over. This is just a like random wild observation, but like up at Sugarloaf State Park, I was noticing the amount of both beetle and woodpecker damage to some of those trees, and the fact that it's looking like some of that like breakage, like the trees aren't necessarily falling at their bases, but they're starting to break apart as the birds are kind of taking them apart. But yeah, certainly, that's a point in time where there's, enough like fungus getting into the trees and they have been weakened, but also standing dead Doug fir can stand for a really long time as well. So I don't have like a hard and fast observation for like, this is the point where they all come down, because they can still be standing there 10 years later, certainly.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I know. I think about some of our huge storms that we had, and well, they're still standing. And they'll continue to. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrix, for that great question. And thank you, Monica. That was wonderful. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to Tim. Tim, tell us about Big Basin.
I will do my best.
Mhm.
Let's see here. All right. Okay, yeah, already a good description of the CZU incident. And my name's Tim Hyland. I'm the Natural Resource Program Manager for the Santa Cruz District of California State Parks. And I've been burning in redwoods here for almost 30 years, and kind of thought I knew a thing or two about how to do that, and until the CZU happened and everything changed. So it's been really interesting trying to figure out how to put fire back into this system. And yeah, some of the same sort of ideas that Monica was talking about as far as finding the right time and what what the options are. So let's see. I'm gonna now, of course, advancing something. I always run into trouble with advancing. How do I do that? How do I move my slide forward? There we go. Okay, so one of the unique things about the CZU fire in Big Basin is that after the fire and after the winter, we had a relatively dry winter. And because the fire was so intense and because redwoods have so much of their biomass in their canopy, a lot of our old growth redwoods actually, as the fire came through, the tops of them blew up. So the heat from the fire turned the water in the bowls into steam and blew the tops out of these trees. And so you ended up the next summer with fire in the tops of 200 plus foot, snags. And these would perk up when it started to get hot and drop coals onto the forest floor. And you would get these lovely little backing fires, the year after the CZU, working their way through the redwood forest, which was really interesting that it would burn, so soon afterwards. There was actually one of these that I mapped that was right around 100 acres. And it got to be 100 acres because everybody was busy doing other stuff. And so Cal Fire never came and put it out, and it put itself out, which was just lovely to see fire, doing that, doing its thing in the forest. But it gave me the idea that's like, okay, well, if this forest, just burned and it's burning again, and there are accounts from the a fire at the turn of the century, it burning the year following, that maybe what this is a huge opportunity for us to get in and use this, this reduction in fuels to get back into this system and keep it going, right? When we would burn in redwood forests, you'd have duff that was, could be 2 feet thick. And so the amount of smoke that you're generating, the amount of residence time, the amount of heat, all of those things was like, well, if you could go in and burn it like a grassland when it just had a little layer of needles, that could be amazing. And so I sketched out a 1,000-acre plot that included 3 of our former 300-acre plots, and started to think about how to get fire back in this system. Of course, then, a year later, the ceanothus started coming up. This is just when it was just kind of getting going. If I was to take this picture now, you wouldn't be able to see any of those trees in the background. This would be a solid wall of ceanothus, which indicates that this has all happened before. There wouldn't be this much ceanothus in the understory of the redwoods if there hadn't been a high severity fire. I will say that in those low severity fires that we did in our prescribed burns in Big Basin, we almost never saw any ceanothus germination. So the ceanothus is sensitive enough to not germinate during low severity fires when the canopy remains intact and it's not going to have any access to light. But if you get a high severity fire and high intensity fire, it all comes out of the seed bank because this is their chance. The redwoods have lost their canopy and they're good to go. So it was a pretty clever little adaptation of ceanothus. But this creates a challenge for trying to put fire back into the system. Now you have a landscape, becoming dominated by 20-foot tall understory shrubs that used to have, very little in the understory. And they're going to respond to drought so that doing a fall burn, which is how we always burned in the past, becomes incredibly hazardous because the live fuel moistures are dropping down. And if you got that ceanothus to go, you're going to have a real hard time controlling it. So what we did is we had done a bunch of work on the roads. Actually, FEMA did a whole lot of work on our roads. And we had a lot of jackpots, a lot of heavy fuels on the edges. And so we went in and lit these heavy fuels, but we lit them in the spring when our live fuel moistures were high and we could go ahead and still get these things to carry. And that was effective for treating the edge of a plot, but we got almost no, well, let's back up. We got very little carry in this plot. My idea of burning 1,000 acres was really a bust. And the reason is that although the year immediately following the CZU, we had 1 hour fuels that had been deposited, shortly after the fire, the canopy was largely gone. So the generator of 1 hour fuels was gone. And what we had was, we actually had fewer 1 hour fuels a year following the CZU because they'd started to rot and they hadn't been replaced. And so there really wasn't enough in the way of fine fuels to carry a fire across this plot. There was a whole lot of, thousands and hundreds and tens, but almost no ones. And we looked around at different areas that burned at different severities, looked for areas that still had canopy, and there really wasn't much of anything that we could burn. But we did have a crew who was working on a trail, and they were having to brush this trail, and they're cutting through this 20-foot tall stand of ceanothus and laying all this ceanothus on the edge of the trail. And we thought, well, we can go in there and we can burn those windrows of ceanothus, which we were able to do. But what we got, this is the result of burning those windrows. It didn't carry really beyond the windrows, but it also completely, the ceanothus had not yet flowered and set fruit long enough to replenish its seed bank. So we ended up, that's a great control line, but that is not what I want my forest to look like, right? That ceanothus is doing something. It's pumping nitrogen back into the system. It's also replenishing its seed bank so that the next time we have something like this come through, it's going to be there. And so I was not super pleased with the results that we got from that. So what do? You have all of these, like Monica was saying, you have all these fuels building up. We've got all these tens and ones and 1,000-hour fuels and more and more and more. And in a redwood forest, so many of the limbs died, so many of them fell. We have ended up with this huge fuel load, but an inability to really, for this landscape to carry fire, which is cool in one respect because you don't have to worry about anything going anywhere. But at the same time, it makes it super challenging to treat those fuels. So what we've decided to do, we're partnering with the Sempervirens Fund. All these little green dots are, it's LIDAR, and that's the canopy. So those are the 200 plus foot tall trees, is to focus on our old growth and get in there and start a really concerted effort of pile burning. We were, so that's what we're going to do in Big Basin. Just as a kind of a side note, Butno State Park, you know, for us, the CZU fire in the parks, it was a tale of two fires. In Big Basin, it burned incredibly hot, took the canopy out. In Butno, it actually was a beautiful backing fire. It burned that park exactly like I would like to see it burned. But even there now, we went out to look to see if we could do a prescribed burn there this fall. And there was not enough leaf litter 5 years later for it to carry a fire. So, which was a bit of a shock to me because the canopy's intact there. But it turns out that that whole, 7 to 12 years in redwood forests on the coast, as a mean fire return interval, it's based on something. You can't actually get it to burn much more frequently than maybe once every 7 years. So that's what I got.
Tim, thank you so much. Questions for Tim? And just while folks are teeing those up, and go ahead, raise your hand and we'll see it, and take yourself off mute. Interesting to hear from all three of you so far about how you step back, assess the situation, and are taking some strategic moves. Looks like Tanya, you've got a question.
Hi. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tanya.
Nice to see you. So I'm curious. I've been doing some surveys up in the Pescadero Creek area, in just north of you, and it's the CZU complex also burned. It's managed by Mid-Peninsula Open Space, and that area where the redwoods were, there was a large number of Notholithocarpus densiflora, the tan oak, that appeared to die after the CZU complex. It was a moderate burn throughout there, mostly on the north-facing slopes. And I was a little surprised by the fact that when they died, it was certainly they had foliage still, so it sort of looked like they didn't burn up, in other words, during the fire itself. But curious if you'd seen that, and also if you could talk about the Arctostaphylos andersonii, which is doing really well, is up at the Big Basin, so it's kind of a highlight, and what your thoughts are on that. So
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, I think that most of, I suppose, Butno burned at relatively low intensity too, and you had a fair amount of tan oak mortality there. We didn't used to get that with our prescribed burn, so it burned a little hotter than that. And we did, even in Big Basin down by Opal Creek, that did burn at high intensity, you still had some leaves on those tan oaks after the fire went through there, which was a little surprising to me too. So I don't know whether they died in the fire shortly thereafter, but yeah, I've noticed the same thing. The Arctostaphylos andersonii is an obligate seeding Arctostaphylos, and it loved the fire. Some of them were 6 feet tall, 2 years after the fire. What I'm really interested in is looking back at some of our burn plots. We actually burned some areas along Middle Ridge Road in 2011 that then burned in 2020. And so the Andersonii, trying to figure out how frequent is too frequent for these seeding manzanitas is always kind of tricky. And so far anyway, it seems like, even that's, not even 10 years. And it seems like it's doing really well. Now, I don't know what the seed bank looks like and whether we're kind of depleting it. And so if you did that every 10 years, where you'd end up, I certainly wouldn't be inclined to do that. I'd rather wait 20 years between fires in those instances. But yeah, it along with, we've got a bunch of Vermonodendron californicum that came up after the fire too, and a bunch of other cool stuff. But yeah, the Andersoni is super happy.
Yeah, good to hear all of that. Tim, thank you so much. Stu, I see your hand raised. If you don't mind, pop your question in chat. I want to make sure that we get to Andrea. Andrea, let's hear from you about the Fire Followers database.
Yeah, let's do that. So I do not also have a presentation, but I'm going out on the edge of a knife here and sharing screens live, which is something you should never do. But 5 years ago tomorrow, I took a picture outside of my house at noon. The sky was orange, and wanted to start a project around fire followers because I knew that this was, something of statewide concern. Got a grant from the Seaver Institute to engage people in observing the recovery after fire. So several things that we wanted to do with the Fire Followers program. One, to help people with materials, so that land management agencies, nonprofits, whoever could do their own outreach, get people out into the fires, to look at what was coming up after all of these burned areas, to change the relationship, to rekindle the relationship of people with fire. We don't talk about water or earth in the same way. So we're always happy to see the rain. We don't like when there's too much water and it floods. But we're always mad at fire as people, apparently, in this day and age. So wanted to change the language from destructive to be a little more nuanced, as well as people who were affected by the fires. It's always traumatic from a human perspective to go through a fire, but by participating in the recovery of the land, hopefully they can also sort of see that this is not a complete disaster for all things involved. So with that seed funding from the Seaver Institute, put together this web page or series of web pages, cnps.org Fire Followers. I will put all of these links in the chat after I'm done presenting. Information for folks. This is all, Steal with Pride stuff. So we really do want people to keep using this information. We did a 2021 Fire Followers as well, because we had that, mostly the mega fire, the Dixie fire, I believe it was huge. And so we got a call to do it again the next year, but not continuing with this. CNPS still has this information up for you to use. And Jose Esparza, who is our community's, I'm not with CNPS anymore, but I'm going to keep saying we and our, is still working with this program and would probably be happy to talk about it with you in ways that you can use this information. Some of the areas where we had the most observations were with land managers and folks who were our pretty strong partners. So Sonoma Ecology Center did a bunch of observing in Sugarloaf Ridge, Save Mount Diablo, Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History. They were all really great partners. So this is sort of the general shell and the people activation system. So, prizes for folks who do a certain amount of observing, such as this shirt that I'm wearing here. Really strong branding and logos and things like that to engage folks. We did a bunch of outreach as well to talk to people about what they can do and other ways that they can get involved. But the bulk of what we were doing was on iNaturalist, and they have been really great partners throughout this project and beyond. our goals were to get 10,000 people involved and making 100,000 observations within the first few years after a fire. Within the first 5 years is generally when you see most of the fire followers, the herbaceous fire followers, come up and then wink out. Obviously, the woody species tend to stick around a little longer. And you can see that a lot of this activation with the partners was really useful. Most observations in the glass fire, followed by the LNU, the CZU, and you can also look by species and by observers. You can poke through this in the map and go to any one of these individual pages for the fire complexes. It'll give you those same overall stats for that individual project. This will show you the recent observations. There's a leaderboard here. We did challenges throughout those years, both to get observations identified and to get people observing particular things. So you can see here some of the most observed species. A lot of these are really good fire following species. You can see the amount that were observed and research grade or needs identification. There's a map of all the observations. You can go in and see the species and how many of each were observed. Do a lot of poking around in here. We also have a data management project that we didn't promote, but we wanted to have a project that had the same perimeters, but also looked back in time so you could have the pre-fire, post-fire observation comparison. And that's something that we really wanted to do, particularly around changing the language that people use around fire, is tying it back to the fire severity, looking at pixel by pixel on the fire severity and the observations pre, post, what's changing. And finally, pretty recently, CNPS and Cal Academy got together and built an R-Shiny app so that you can actually do that exploration yourself. So we can pick a fire here on this first page. There's a little more information about the data sources. So this is the fire followers project, was the observation data. The fire perimeters were all from FRAP, and the burn severity is from the monitoring trends and bird severity. So we can pick the glass fire that's got a ton of observations. You have density maps, fire severity, most frequently seen species, and greatest post-fire change. You can change the fire here. You can look at different date ranges. And then there are filters for observations. So you can change the taxa that you want to look at. These are all for plants because obviously CNPS, Native Plant Society. So if we wanted to look just at the Liliopsida, we can normalize the counts. So there's a different number of observations pre and post burn. Obviously, you want to be able to have more of a one-to-one comparison, or you can just look at the number of the total number. So this is, you can see the change on that. You can also download the data. So we can go into fire severity. You can see the changes here. This is the relative frequency. You can see the difference. Between normalizing and not. These are the most frequent species because we have Liliopsida turned on. It's only those in that class. So let's go back to alt taxa. See what that looks like. And unsurprisingly, a lot of fire followers. And then the greatest post-fire change.
Andrea,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to
we need
you
more.
probably-
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, I'm gonna
All
have to bring it to close, but this is phenomenal. I just raise your hand if this is the first time you've seen this. We will make sure that links to all of these are circulated after email and the Google group. And I just can't thank you enough for putting the data back in the wildfire data working group, Andrea. Thank you so much to Susie and Monica, Tim, and Andrea for sharing their work, perspectives, and observations today. Thank you all for joining us and listening and asking great questions and sharing resources. Like I said, we'll make sure that the links are circulated on the Google group. As always, this group is all about sharing knowledge and building connections. So if you heard anything today that sparks a collaboration or you want to follow up on, please reach out to folks directly or post to the Google group. That's what this is all about. We'll see you at the next Wildfire Data Working Group on October 21st. Same time, we'll focus on wildfire-related partnerships and what makes them work. We'll see you then. Thank you all so much for joining us today.